She will die soon. Just be patient. The husband sold the house with his sick wife. And a year later, he met him at an expensive restaurant and gasped with surprise. Brandon was in a great mood throughout the workday. The man hadn't felt such a spiritual uplift for a long time, which inspired him and made him smile all the time. His great mood was due to the fact that Brandon was going to pull off an extremely lucrative deal to acquire a luxurious mansion that night. The man kept glancing at his watch, which seemed to have stopped, or the time seemed to be moving extremely slow. Finally, the workday was over, and Brandon hurried to the meeting with the owner of the property he wanted to inquire. Mr. Kelly will be so happy. It's such a luxurious house, and the price is so low. It's more of a gift than a purchase, the man thought joyfully in anticipation of the great deal. Henry, the owner of the house, was holding the documents for the purchase of the house and was already waiting for Brandon on the terrace. Finally, I was already starting to worry, the man said, holding out his hand to the buyer. Sorry, I had to stay late at work. You know, all this time I couldn't help but worry about one thing. Why is the price for this house 3 times lower than the market price? Brandon asked, shaking Henry's hand. Henry seemed thrown off for a moment, and then he said, I'm going to answer your question. It's no secret. I decided to move to another city, so I don't need this house anymore. I'd like to sell it as soon as possible, but if there's something you don't like, I'm sure I can find another buyer. Of course, Brandon didn't want to lose the house, so he gladly agreed to the deal. Since the documents for the house that Henry provided didn't raise any suspicion, Brandon didn't hesitate for a second before signing them. The next day, he transferred the entire amount due to the owner of the mansion and considered the deal completed. On the occasion of the acquisition of the valuable real estate, Brandon went to the supermarket, where he bought a bottle of good wine, a box of chocolates, and some other treats that his girlfriend Kelly loved so much. Having entered the house, the man admired the spacious living room with the fireplace and a huge chandelier over his head. Finally, I have my own home. I'm 35 years old and still sleeping in cheap motels. Now I can start thinking about having kids. It's okay that Kelly doesn't want to be a mother. As soon as she sees this house, she's going to change her mind, Brandon thought, going from room to room. The more time he spent at the house, the more he liked it. Finally, he got to the second floor, where the renovations had recently been carried out, just like on the first floor. Suddenly, as he was passing by a half-open bedroom, Henry heard a muffled groan. The man froze in surprise and then carefully peered inside. Brandon nearly fainted from what he saw in the bedroom. An emaciated and pale woman was lying on the floor of the bedroom. She was wearing pajamas, which gave the impression that she was living in this house. Wow, that's definitely a surprise. What other secrets are hidden in the walls of this mansion? Now I know why the price was so low, Brandon thought, lifting the girl off the floor and putting her on the bed. Who are you, and what are you doing in my house? The stranger whispered in surprise. Sorry, but this is my house now. Henry Johnson sold it to me, Brandon replied, covering the girl with the blanket. Oh wow, my dirtbag husband has already sold the house, and me along with it, said the woman, whose eyes were now full of tears. Having heard this, Brandon turned pale and realized that he had probably fallen victim to a fraudster. Nevertheless, the man still couldn't fully comprehend what had actually happened. But how did your signature get on the sales documents? Brandon asked in surprise. In response, the woman only forced a smile and threw her hands up. Although the fooled man already guessed that the cunning businessman had already simply forged his wife's signature in order to sell the house as soon as possible. Excuse me, can I help you with anything? Brandon asked, deciding to postpone the unpleasant conversation. Yes, I'd be grateful if you could bring me a glass of water, please, the woman asked, looking timidly at the new owner of the house. Brandon's heart filled with pity when he saw the unspeakable pain and despair in the woman's eyes. When the man brought her a glass of water, the former owner of the house took a sip, and then, being unable to hold back her tears any longer, she started crying. The woman was crying openly, sobbing loudly, trying to at least somehow let go of the enormous stress caused by the latest news. Unbeknownst to herself, the sobbing stranger told Brandon her story. The woman's name was Mary, and she used to be the wife of Henry Johnson, the man who sold this house to Brandon in such a cunning way. The young people were married for 2 years, after which the unfortunate woman was diagnosed with cancer. At first, Henry did everything possible to help his wife. He took her to medical centers and provided her with all the meds. All the Mary's doctors, the oncologists, were in agreement that she had a very good chance of recovery. However, she needed to undergo an expensive surgery, and that was a problem because her husband was afraid of losing money more than anything else in the world. Instead of helping his wife, the man resigned himself to the fact that she was seriously ill and finally lost faith in her healing. Henry locked her in at home and went back to work as if nothing happened. Sure, Mary still had her mother, but she had recently married for the second time. Olivia Hudson's new husband was 10 years younger than her, so the woman felt loved and young again, and devoted all her love and tenderness to her beloved new husband. When Mary's stepfather was offered a good job in another city, her mother didn't hesitate even for a second and moved with her husband. It was rumored that Olivia and Charles had a baby, which meant that Mary now had a little brother. Understanding that her mom was busy with her new life, the unfortunate woman realized that she had no one to help her. So she closed herself off from the world in the second-floor bedroom and prepared to die. Moreover, Henry had buried his wife in his mind a long time ago and quickly found a girlfriend. And together, they came up with the plan to sell the house. All that was left for the unfortunate Mary to do was cry from the pain, both physical and mental, feeling unwanted and abandoned by both her husband and her mother. The first thing Brandon did after hearing the sick woman's shocking story was call the cunning businessman, Henry. Demanding an explanation, he accused the former owner of the house of fraud, but Henry turned out to be a tough nut to crack. He already had an answer at the ready. "Is there something you don't like? The price of the house is at least 3 times below market rate. As for the woman in the bedroom, she will die soon, so you won't have any problems with her," Henry said indifferently and hung up the phone. For a moment, it seemed to Brandon that he was simply having some kind of a bad dream, and that as soon as he opened his eyes, the nightmare would be over. But no matter how much he rubbed his eyes, the pale woman lying on the bed didn't go anywhere. Brandon realized he was now responsible for the former owner of the house and decided to help her. Moreover, he didn't only do it because he felt it was his duty, but also because Mary made him feel deep respect for her. Brandon was attracted to the woman because even given her terminal disease, she kept holding on with her last strength and was fighting till the end. Of course, Mary rejected Brandon's help at first, fearing that she would be judged by the new owner of the house. But then she realized that she had no other options and changed her mind. Especially since her husband Henry had completely abandoned her and took his new girlfriend on an oceanside vacation. Therefore, when Brandon took the woman to the hospital, she realized that this man was the only one who was actually willing to help her. "Thank you. I don't even have the words to express how grateful I am," Mary said with tears in her eyes when the doctor at the hospital set the date for her surgery. "You'll thank me when you get better, and in the meantime, focus on regaining your strength and not being afraid," Brandon said and lightly touched the woman's hand. Mary didn't know that in order to pay for her surgery, the man sold his car and mortgaged his newly acquired house. This was probably the moment when Brandon realized how attracted he was to this woman. Of course, this story ultimately caused Brandon's breakup with Kelly, with whom he had no rapport for a long time. Having met Mary, the man's outlook on life changed, giving him hope for and faith in the future. When the woman had her surgery, the first person she saw in her room afterwards was Brandon. Fortunately, the doctor said that everything went well, and Mary was now awaiting rehabilitation, which was supposed to help her return to a normal life. Dressed in a suit, Brandon was holding a huge bouquet of white roses and smiling happily. "I didn't come alone. I brought guests," Brandon said and winked at the woman. Mary almost fainted when her mother timidly came into the room. "How are you, dear? Forgive me for abandoning you when you needed me the most," Olivia said with tears in her eyes and came up to her daughter. This heartwarming scene didn't leave anyone indifferent. Even Brandon couldn't hold back his tears. Thus, choosing to give the woman some privacy, he went out into the hall. There, he ran into Mary's stepfather, who was holding her half-brother in his arms. Brandon understood that the woman's parents had their own lives, and of course it would be unfair to accuse them of spending too little time with their daughter. Mary spent about a month in the hospital, and when it was time for her to go home, Brandon invited the woman to stay at the house, which belonged to her for a long time. Feeling an irresistible attraction to each other, the young people started living together at the infamous house, where their life was now full of mutual love and respect. Every day, Brandon thanked fate for bringing him to that house and letting him meet Mary. He was ready to move mountains for her and achieve the impossible. And he actually did. A year after they met, the young people had a modest wedding, which forever tied their lives together. Brandon didn't just provide his wife with everything she needed, but he was also rather successful at his work and became the head of the sales department at one of the companies in the city. One day, deciding to celebrate their wedding anniversary, Brandon got a table at an expensive restaurant. The dinner had everything: beautiful flowers, champagne, gourmet dishes, and of course, candles. Looking at her husband with eyes full of love, Mary felt happy and desired. The dinner went great, and when the couple was about to leave the restaurant, they came face to face with the workman at the door. His face seemed familiar to Mary. Looking more closely, the woman was surprised to recognize the workman as her first husband, Henry, who was desperately trying to hide, pulling a baseball cap over his eyes. Of course, Mary had no doubt that her cunning ex-husband recognized her too. The woman didn't tell Brandon what she knew, but simply hugged her husband and gave him a good and passionate kiss. At the same time, tears filled Henry's eyes, as he realized that because of his bitterness and stupidity, he had lost everything important he had in his life. Having taken his girlfriend to the ocean, Henry quickly squandered his savings and the money he got from selling the house. Realizing that now Henry was just a bankrupt loser, his beautiful girlfriend left him and rushed off in search of another rich fool. And only now, working hard in the kitchen, did the man realize what a mistake he had made by abandoning his beloved wife. Unfortunately, there are things in life that cannot be fixed, and the story of Henry's bankruptcy is a perfect proof of that.